The opening sequence of episode 8 is essentially just recap, with the only major change being the tonal shift that has happened as a result of Eren's reappearance. In story, of course, they are yet to learn that this abnormal is in fact Eren in a Titan form. But very symbolically, the opening ends with Eren's roar, which Mikasa very fittingly described as the embodiment of humanity's rage. Which brings us on to the title, I Can Hear the Beating of His Heart. The easy connection is of course the one we'll be delving into plenty more later, and that is Mikasa actually listening to Eren's heartbeat after he came out of the Titan at the end of the episode. The interpretation here is essentially just that Mikasa's sheer disbelief was so pronounced that the only thing she could do is just literally check for a sign of life. Though, because this is overanalyzing Attack on Titan, another perspective I would bring up is one that refers to the rest of the soldiers. As we've seen throughout the previous couple of episodes, with them running out of gas and with the Titans slowly picking them off one by one, the ones that were still left were essentially dead people walking anyway. But now that a Titan has appeared and is actively fighting its own kind, they are reminded that their hearts are in fact still beating and that the fight is not over just yet. The whole heart still beating motif has cropped up in other media as well as a symbolic gesture to remind you that you are in fact alive. And I think it works very well here considering just how dark some of the previous episodes have been. Moving into the episode itself, however, we open with a direct follow-up to the previous one, Armin refilling Mikasa's gas canisters and the conversation they have there. Though right after that, we get to hear Armin's inner monologue and his take on this entire situation. First off, the transition we see here is once again just top-notch. We start the sequence with that uneasy music, but as we drift into Armin's thoughts and him hearing Eren's roar, which, again, very much symbolizes humanity's resistance, the music fades to silence and then into those sharp plucking strings as Armin begins planning. I think I've already mentioned this before, but even from my non-existent musical background, these staccato-type music tracks are often paired with these cold, calculated, and thinking tracks. And that is exactly what we see here. As Armin lays out his ideas, those sharp strings continue throughout. And in a broader sense, I think it's easy to forget that even this far back, Armin's plans were extremely solid. Keep in mind that at this point in time, he really has next to no experience, so him just adapting to the situation and putting this entire scheme together on the fly should give you an idea of just how many steps ahead he tries to think. And very similar to Erwin, our other local master strategist, Armin tends to pull these all-or-nothing type of plays. In this case, essentially his entire plan gambles on just one observation, the fact that this Titan is going after its own kind. But that is it. If that fact remains true, he can leverage it to his advantage, but if it doesn't, this entire scheme comes apart at the seams. Just a super interesting scene to watch in retrospect, considering how much it evokes the same exact feeling as we later see with Erwin. With Connie even straight up asking, are we really going to go all in on just one assumption? And also, the fact that Mikasa fully trusts Armin in this sequence also has a few very notable angles to it. First off, remember that no more than an hour ago he told her that Eren died and he was absolutely helpless. So her being the first to put 100% of her trust in Armin's all-or-nothing gamble just speaks volumes as to how much she actually believes in him. Even after losing the most important person to her, she holds absolutely none of that against Armin. And of course, the fact that Mikasa still does believe him also has important implications for Armin. Especially because confidence is probably one of the things he lacks most. So seeing the affirmation of a friend who he feels so indebted to certainly does help that. But secondly, and I won't get into all of my rambles about the final season again, I think you can pretty easily see how this also directly mirrors most of what we see later, with Mikasa once again trusting Armin's neutral judgment and doing things that to her might otherwise seem nuts. Oh, and side note, the whole "you plan on fighting a Titan with a Titan," only for Mikasa to calmly say, "Yes, exactly," really gave me a solid giggle just because of how nonchalant this entire thing is. It's like, yeah, these monsters that have been eating us for literally decades, yeah, let's fight alongside it, cool. But Armin's gang isn't the only one to have things finally turn in their favor. We cut to Jean, who too is struggling with everything that has happened, questioning his own leadership, etc, etc. But then suddenly, he realizes it's now or never. The Titans are distracted, and unlike his fallen comrades, his heart is still beating, and it's not over just yet. And very similar to Armin's squad, he too begins rushing toward the HQ. And it's then that we get a few tiny scenes that are super cheeky in retrospect. Notice how we cut from Jean to Mikasa to Eren's Titan, who is still of course a mystery, and right back to Jean. Pretty clearly showing you that all three parties here are allies and we're just seeing different angles of the same mission. Especially with all three killing Titans. And also, I can't not praise Studio Wit's animation here. The hand-drawn Eren's Titan is just so smooth. And another thing I want to note here is the tonal shift that has happened and how this scene directly mirrors episode 5 and Eren's death. We see the same exact heroic music kick in as the scouts begin their charge. Only in episode 5, that charge was abruptly cut short as the abnormal got Thomas and later chomped off Eren's leg. Here on the other hand, and I think this has to be purposeful, they begin their charge and we see Jean's leg get caught by one of the Titans. But this time, it is no more than a split-second setback as he frees himself and continues right on his way. So again, things have indeed changed. And also, this whole charging to the HQ shot would also be replicated far later. Only there, instead of Eren helping them, all of them are essentially working to stop him. But that is once again me going on about something 70 episodes into the future, so let's move on. After their charge, and unfortunately a few more lost soldiers, they finally make it to the HQ where they find the Resupply Squad all terrified out of their minds, hiding under the tables. Like I already mentioned last time, from a realism point of view, I think this entire sequence was genuinely excellent. Clearly, the inexperienced soldiers would be terrified. And clearly, Jean would be furious that they just left them to die. And so, we very much see a clash between the two. I think it just captures that emotional dichotomy of fear and anger extremely well. And also, there's a nice bit of continuity that the blood from the guy who, you know, took the quick way out is still present on this cadet. And then we get the absolutely excellent scene that is the wall being smashed in. We see the Titans begin to swarm on the building now that most of the remaining soldiers are all grouped up there. And immediately, we're flung right back into that hopelessness as we see Jean, quite literally, stand face to face with two lumbering Titans. But all of that is suddenly interrupted as we cut to complete silence and we only hear this heavy pulse. And both are just annihilated by Eren's fist. Everything in this sequence is absolutely excellent. First off, the constant tonal 180s during these couple of minutes work really well to establish that sense of confusion. Because yes, this Titan turning on its own kind is a symbol of hope, but it is also a gigantic uncertainty. And the struggle between the cadets, the Titans breaching the walls, and that brief moment of defeat just reminds us of that. But again, things are changing, and Eren blasting them is very much that. And secondly, the sound design here is simply excellent. The entire composition of the Colossal's theme, fading into that distorted, uncertain theme that we saw with Eren, and then that pulse just opening it all up as we get right into the climax. Perfection. But enough gushing. In story, we see Mikasa's squad also make it to the HQ where they explain this entire thing. Number one, in a meta sense, them betting everything on Eren and saying he is their best chance of survival is of course true in more ways than one, since his ultimate goal would be to just level absolutely everything outside of the walls. So in an extreme sense, yes, he is their best chance of survival, mainly because there will be no one else to contend with them. But number two, the animation here of Eren going ham on the Titans is absolutely glorious. Especially as we see him use proper hand-to-hand fighting techniques to just essentially toss them around. And the sun now full-on basking down on him very much signifies that almost heavenly intervention that he symbolizes here. So yeah, while you won't find me complaining on forums about how CG is the bane of all anime and that we should literally burn all computers to stop CG forever, I do admit the hand-drawn Titans are absolutely glorious. Perhaps I'll get around to doing a standalone video discussing the whole CG hand-drawn split, but as of right now, I'll just leave it there. The animation here is top draw, and I am very happy about it. We then move into the mid-cards, where the first just elaborates a little more on how the ODM gear works, but the other gives us a very explicit size comparison between the Titans. And with this one, I want to really quickly just dispel all the confusion surrounding their sizes. We'll talk about this plenty more when we get to the scenes themselves, but a few times in the series, we see the animators play with perspective to just convey a greater sense of power. The most notable example that I've actually already mentioned before is the one in Season 3. In this sequence, Eren barely goes up to its ankle, while in reality, he should be somewhere around the Colossal's knees. And some people say that no, the Colossal just hasn't transformed into his full size or something along those lines, but the thing is, we always have the walls as a 50-meter benchmark. And in this particular scene, the Colossal is clearly bigger than the walls, and it's Eren that is comparatively smaller. So in this case, no, there isn't some weird Titan shenanigans, all of this is purely for the sake of dramatization. If you want to convey the idea that we are fighting against all odds, you just make the enemy bigger. That's not its actual size, it's just a narrative tool to convey that overwhelming sense of power to us as the viewer. And on a similar note, some are confused about the size of the Colossal in relation to the Wall Titans, mostly because the Wall Titans have also been described as Colossals and look extremely similar. And here too, the answer is actually super straightforward. The Colossal is 60 meters because it is one of the core 9 Titans. The Wall Titans, on the other hand, are just pure Titans. They are very big, that much is true, but they aren't quite the size of the Colossal and are just 50 meters. So yeah, they are very similar, but not quite the size of Bertholdt's Colossal. But alright, that's another case of me babbling on about something far into the future. Basically what I wanted to say here is that giving us these explicit sizes is just super cool for online discussion mostly. Knowing that the Colossal is big is cool, but attaching an explicit number to that is just fun. Though, returning to our soldier squads, the building itself is obviously still swarming with Titans. And so, that's what the concern is right now. But before we get to that, we get a small scene that once again will leave you with a big stupid smile. Because we see a scene of, surprise surprise, Reiner asking Connie how much he knows about the rampaging Titan, that of course being Eren. Connie obviously tells him, I can tell you, but let's deal with this first, and that is basically the end of that. But now in hindsight, we know perfectly well that this isn't just some random small scene or purely curiosity, because Reiner is obviously prodding for information. Keep in mind that their mission of finding the founder literally began over 5 years ago, and they've still found absolutely nothing. Oh, and also, to clear up any confusion right away, even as they'd see that Eren is the Titan after all, they do not know that he has the founder. The Marleyans knew for a fact that the attack Titan was missing, which, as we learn later, was because it was held by the Owl, who was of course an Eldian spy. So to the best of their knowledge, Eren is the one who somehow must have acquired it. But as far as the founder goes, they're still absolutely clueless. Returning to the question at hand, there are still Titans that need to be dealt with. But here, I want to once again bring up the gigabrain that is Armin. So far, we've talked a lot about how Mikasa is an absolute monster in combat, right? But I think it's easy to overlook Armin in a lot of these situations. Because just like I mentioned a few minutes ago, in these early arcs, he's the one to come up with a plan from essentially scratch in less than ideal circumstances. And once again, just like Irvin later on, he goes all in, explicitly saying that all of this relies on just one attack. But the one fatal flaw with Armin, as we've seen and will continue to see, is that he lacks confidence, and that is also what we see here. His planning is perfectly sound, but he both feels bad about asking the 7 of their strongest to risk their lives on this Hail Mary, as well as just isn't confident that this is truly the best way. And despite everyone listening to him and implicitly confirming that he is very much the brains of the group, he still remains uncertain. And the final words of comfort come from Mikasa, who tells Armin that he always comes up with the right solution, and it's that ability that has saved both her and Eren already. The scene is cut off there, but I am 99% certain that she's referring to the first episode where Armin, instead of going after Eren and Mikasa, called Hans, who would be the one to ultimately save them. He of course didn't fight off the Titan and didn't save Eren's mother, but without him, it's more than likely that the two of them would have been toast. So she just essentially thanks him for that. And you have to remember that in the utter chaos that we saw there, it actually does take a level head to just not run after your friends and actually react properly, which I think Armin very much did. But with that said, we then see everyone prepping to do their parts, and this is also where we see some rare comedy, with Reiner revealing the other weak spot of the Titans. One is of course their nape, but the other is shoving it up their And with Connie and Sasha being the dynamic duo that they of course actually believe it. Jokes aside, we see the entire plan executed, which is also where the opening sequence is taken from. But in terms of the scene itself, I do think it was super unique, mostly because this is something we don't really see in the series that much. Far later, guns would become a lot more prominent, but in the early seasons, it was ODM gear through and through. So them just blasting them in this sequence was super tense, especially because we've already seen that even after taking cannonballs, the Titans are usually perfectly fine. So this sort of face-to-face attack with just basic rifles is very much an all-or-nothing type of deal. And also, fun fact, the Titan that Sasha misses her shot on is the same one that killed Mina before. And also, if you carefully look through the flashbacks, it does also appear in the Eldia Restorationist group. But with that, Armin's plan is a success and they begin refilling their gas canisters. But not before getting some more of that sibling energy between Connie and Sasha, because of course. Though one thing I really found interesting here is the brief conversation between Jean and Marco. We see Jean essentially tell Marco to stop thinking of him as a leader, because he's not. But Marco then answers that he's not strong and that's why he can empathize with the weak. And it's that empathy and objectivity that makes him a great leader. This is really one of those small lines that are said in the series that really makes me think, because what really does make a good leader? Is it the strength and mental fortitude to make hard decisions? Or is it actually simply empathy and understanding the weight of your decisions? As with many of these sorts of scenes, it isn't even lingered on, but with the emotional music fading into the background, I really think this entire sequence is beautiful. And that is made even more emotionally impactful because all of the dark messed up things we've seen. So a small scene, but a really thought-provoking one in my opinion. Especially in the context of what we've seen with Armin, because I'd argue that based on what we've seen with him, it is also empathy that is a great strength of his. Even when planning the strike with the Seven, his first question is, I feel bad about sending you to the front lines. So yeah, a really nice small scene. Though with the soldiers all refueled, they make their way outside, where they notice that the Titan is now the one being attacked by its own kind. First off, Mikasa here saying that if they found out the mystery of the Titan, they'd be able to pull themselves out of this hopeless reality came a little too true. But much more importantly, we see, big surprise, the Marley squad led by Reiner, who immediately says if it gets devoured, we'll be as clueless as ever. Once again, considering their mission, obviously he noticed some signs of it being a potential shifter, so capturing it really has nothing to do with understanding it as much as it is for their own goals. On initial viewing, this of course just seems like a smart move. The Titan who helped humans is now weakened and is being devoured. Obviously, you try to save it for nothing more than research. But in hindsight, it is of course much more complicated than that. And what I find to be the funniest line in this entire thing is what Jean says. Remember how he just had the profound conversation with Marco about how he can make the right calls? Yeah, well here, he said that if they don't do anything, they can finally get out of this hellhole. And oh boy, how right Jean turned out to be, because our friend Eren would kinda sorta try to level the rest of the world. So, yeah. But obviously, the rest of the Marley squad also pipes up, and says that saving it is the best shout, and that it can become an ally. But all of that is cut short as the abnormal who began this entire thing shows up to also get a piece of Eren. And here we get another absolutely excellent scene of Eren charging forward out of sheer rage and getting revenge on it quite literally by the skin of his teeth. And again, the hand-drawn animation as he just runs forward is so good. Just how weighty and weakened its movements feel is just excellent. But moments later, we cut to silence as it finally falls. and as the steam begins to rise, Eren appears above its nape. And oh boy, the following sequence is just perfect. The close-up on Mikasa as that moment of realization kicks in, which is made even more pronounced by the admittedly very cliche blowing of the wind, accentuating how this moment literally moves her both emotionally as well as very literally. That slow piano starts as Mikasa just runs in complete disbelief. As we cut between Mikasa, who is enveloped in heavenly light because a literal miracle has come true. To her, this is heaven. But as we cut to Eren, it's just the remnants of a battle. Steam, smoke, and fire embers. Number one, I think that juxtaposition here just works really well to sell the entire moment from an emotional point of view. But number two, I also think it says a lot about their characters in the bigger story. Remember that for what they believe to be literally hundreds of years, Titans have done nothing but mindlessly slaughter humans. Yes, for one reason or another, this one seemed to save them. But from a purely realistic point of view, you do not overwrite everything you know that quickly. This might just be an outlier. And so Eren is very much coming out of a complete monster. A monster whose goals might not have been understood, but a monster who did everything in his power to protect the people of Paradis. But Mikasa never registered any of it. This wasn't a monster. She saw Eren and that is all. The sight of him alone already evoking heavenly imagery to convey that to her, he is the world. And because she truly believed he is gone, this is nothing short of a miracle. For that split moment, nothing around her matters. It is just heavenly light because he is alive. And what I think conveys all of that perfectly is what she does next. She just goes to listen for a heartbeat. I would say try to picture yourself in such a situation, but frankly, it is impossible. Seeing a person come back to life is not really something any of us can realistically imagine. And I think that her just trying to hear something as humanely fundamental as a heartbeat is absolutely beautiful. I think it masterfully conveys that utter bewilderment of the situation and how at this point, truly nothing makes sense. But if there is anything she can do, she can at least make sure that Eren's heart is still beating. And oh boy, Mikasa's voice actress here. That slow descent into a complete breakdown as she just screams, absolute perfection. And even the animation here, I am an absolute sucker for Wit's animation as is, but I think those super pronounced thick outlines really do a great job of separating their silhouettes as both of them are just enveloped by that steam. And it also conveys that feeling of them almost being enveloped in their own little world for a second. Finally, against all odds, they are reunited. And yeah, for the 300th time, I won't rehash all of my tinfoil about the ending, but if this sort of scene were to be mirrored for the final season, you can probably already get a glimpse of what I think the story is headed toward. Feel free to check out my first video in this series for my more detailed thoughts on that. And once again, manga folks, no spoilers in the comments, thank you very much. Though, similar to Mikasa, Armin too is of course in complete disbelief. And I think while his inner monologue is similar to Mikasa's, it is actually also very different. Most of all because of how drastically their worldviews differ. Keep in mind that Armin is driven by facts and logic, and at this very moment, no matter how you swing it, logic does not explain this. Eren was missing a leg and was devoured in front of his very eyes. That is a fact. Him reappearing with his limbs intact, out of a Titan no less, that is inexplicable. And I think that moment of him simply going to hold his hand while just trying to understand what's going on is also just beautiful in how much meaning it actually captures. And then those final words from Jean are just the cherry on top, as he simply says, "So, does that mean Eren did all of this?" Because yes, all of that carnage we saw and the only reason most of them are alive is because of him. And just like that, for the first time in what will be many times, the entire story as we know it now has been flipped upside down. And that moment of realization here captures that flawlessly. An obligatory weather note, note how at this point the dark clouds are all but gone. Though, with that said, there are a few more things to talk about here. First off, the Marley Squad. As we've already seen, obviously this Titan is very much of interest to them, and as of right now, they know for an absolute fact that Eren has the Attack Titan. And while their mission really had nothing to do with the attack, as we'd see later on, considering they found literally 0 leads to the Founder, it's essentially just a consolidation prize for Marley just to not return empty-handed. So yes, Eren is very much of interest because of the attack, but again, they have no idea that he has the Founding Titan. But number 2, a couple of questions that tend to pop up here. How does Eren even transform? And more importantly, why did Mr. Santa Claus not get the Founder and the Attack Titan since he clearly ate him? And the answer here is actually super simple. He didn't eat him, he swallowed him whole. In order to get someone's Titan, you must ingest their spinal fluid, which in this case, it did not. Now, if Eren got crushed between its teeth as he was holding his mouth open, then it would be a different story. But as we saw, it was just his hand that was bitten clean off. And also, how and why did Eren even transform? Well, first off, we know that while a shifter is severely injured, they cannot transform. That is the entire basis for his capture later and how Levi keeps Zeke under control. And this also makes perfect sense in our situation, as there was indeed a period of time during which Eren still didn't transform. Rather, he first regenerated and only then transformed and burst out of the Santa Boy. Because we know that Eren had literally 0 idea what he was doing, that was of course out of sheer instinct and nothing more. But point is, he transformed only after regenerating. And lastly, why does Eren not have the Titan markings in this sequence? And the answer here isn't quite as clear-cut, but we do have several context clues to go off of. To put it very shortly, the common consensus is that it depends on how strong the link between the shifter and the Titan is, and how long they stayed in their Titan form. This is backed up by the fact that Eren develops the markings later on as he fuses with the Titan and stays in it longer, as well as all the other shifters who would have stronger connections with their Titans and their markings would seem, for lack of a better word, deeper. Though, with that said, Falco had the Titan markings immediately after coming out of his very first transformation, so that is sorta iffy. And another thing to note here is that throughout the first season, Eren's markings aren't even consistent, as after coming out of his Berserk form, they look much more scaly and more so like burn marks rather than those streaks we usually see. For Bertolt, we saw similar markings which fit in with this whole burning body mass colossal thing. But in Eren's case, it's sort of hard to say how much of this was Wit taking some creative liberties, and how much of it is actually deliberate. That said though, I do have a bit of a different perspective that may totally be completely baseless on this entire thing, and this is what I'm calling on all of you because I genuinely cannot remember. But here I have to ask, do the characters in-universe even see the markings? It's one of those things that are easy to overlook, but in many cases like these, we have to remember that these sorts of visuals are often more so to convey something to us as the audience rather than in-universe. Haki in One Piece, for example, it's not actually visible. Ditto for airbending in Avatar, I mean, it's literally wind, right? It's just so that we can actually see it. And that said, have any of the characters in-universe ever mentioned anything about the markings? Because I can't seem to recall. But yeah, with all that said, unlike all the previous questions, the markings one is a bit dubious if you ask me, as there are some conflicting clues as to how exactly they manifest. But with all that, that is episode 8. I actually thought this would be our first double episode, but considering this is already 10 pages long, no it will not. But I do think that this is an episode that is, again, absolutely awesome to return to with the benefit of hindsight. Especially with all the subtle things like the weather shifts and everything else of that nature. Admittedly, I've been saying that for basically all the episodes, so I don't really know how much that says about this episode and more so about Attack on Titan in general. They are all just great. But with all that out of the way, now that we've got our own Titan buddy, things will only continue to heat up, so I hope to see you then as we continue overanalyzing Attack on Titan. And that's the video. Yep, another one longer than the episode itself, though chances are I will be able to squeeze in a couple for the next video at least. Hopefully. Maybe. Probably not. Though that said, I want to say a massive thank you to our current patrons who allow me to produce even more of these for you all. And let's also give a warm welcomes to the newest member of the team, Ethan Moore. Without you, there'd be a whole lot less of my ramblings, so seriously, thank you, thank you. Other than that, I want to say thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.